This is a YouTube improv story, The Crazy Werewolf. My name is Thunderdrummer. I do improv stories here on YouTube, and you can make your own on Twitch by redeeming enough points. Um, I've been wanting to do a story about a werewolf that's a little bit off kilter than your normal werewolf stories. And so here I wrote just the basic bare bones of what I've been thinking about. But here it goes. Well, this story is about a werewolf named the True Bright. He was he was hidden away, but ended up in the human um, adoption system. He basically became an orphan. A family at birth, or close to 1 year old, ended up getting him. Well, that didn't last very long. He was about 19, no, not 19. He was about 4 or 5 years old when a incident happened that he still don't completely remember, but um, what he does remember is his adopted parents screaming at him saying he's evil, the spawn of Satan, he's crazy, he's loony. There is no such thing as this. Leave now, all out of anger because one of their kids got hurt. So he ended up taking off through the woods. Um, his adopted parents never saw him again. Well, he when he took off like a bat out of hell. No telling where he actually ended up. Well, he started camping in the middle of the woods at the age of 5 years old. He had above level intelligence and was always interested in camping and survival stuff, even barely able to talk, and he was always looking for survival shows and stuff on TV. But keep in mind, he was still only 5 years old. Well, he came across this homeless guy in the middle of the woods, which shocked the homeless guy because he looked down and saw this 5-year-old boy, and he asked him, "Are you lost? Where's your parents?" And then the boy starts just blurting out crying. The guy was like, "Whoa, whoa!" He's like, then the boy started sniffling a little bit, and he's like, "My parents kicked me out of my house, saying that the things I was seeing was unholy, and I was crazy and evil." He's like, the old man hit his head. They kicked out a 5-year old, or like a 3 or 4 year old? I'm five, mister. Like, I am a homeless guy. I can't really take care of a kid. We need to get no. And the boy stood his ground. I'm going to camp. Be a wild man. And like, he had his like hands up like this and like the whole Captain Morgan pose, thinking he's like some superhero. The old man was like, "You know what? No, I'm at least gonna watch you for now, and then figure out what to do with you after I get on to what I'm doing." Well, this man, his name is Keylicious. No, that not Keylicious. That would just be lame. Um, his name was Bill. Let's just call him Bill. Yes, Bill's a good name. Um, my name's Bill, kid. It may not be my real name, but that's what you're getting for right now. If you're gonna live here, I might as well teach you ways to be able to survive the woods. And the kid looked up with bright eyes. Really, really? Like, these aren't your mom and pop techniques. This is a way for you to gather enough energy for you to actually protect yourself while you're here in the wild. Um, the kid was jumping up and down. Yay! And he was like, but first things first, you gotta learn how to meditate. Like, meta what? Metahuman? No, kid, meditate. And then he ends up setting them down and teaching them how to meditate. Um, Eventually, over like the next year or so, he starts teaching them what he knows of cultivation. He's a rogue cultivator that ended up fleeing from the sect he was in because he pissed off a elder for beating up one of his kids for trying to defend the girl he loved. The girl ended up shunning him as well, and he just ran till he couldn't run anymore. And he disemboweled the guild and all that good old stuff. Um, so he was living in the woods, just cultivating in a high spiritual area, which he didn't understand how this kid got here, since it was next to impossible that most normal humans would just walk around this area. But it was also good for him too, because he ended up learning, because there ain't no dangerous beast in this area that would actually be carnivore without finding or gaining at least a little bit of intelligence to deface their baser intelligence. Well, about a year went by. He actually started learning how to cultivate and learning how to start forming his dantian. He ran into a problem when this, because from what his teacher was saying, his master, um, it ain't working like he should. Then, with his young brain not understanding some of the dangers of what he was doing, he started actually learning how the energy started passing through him. So he could actually develop his dantian in different ways. Well, what he saw when he went inside was what he thought was a spiritual animal, which he thought it was a soul, which had its own pure light looked into it. And then he also saw a whole bunch of natural energies and stuff already inside him. Well, instead of doing what he's been doing all this time and trying to force he started letting the energy started flowing together. And as they threw together, um, between the little wolf, which he thought was a soul, and a big part of natural energy, started floating together and started forming what he thought looked like a Chinese symbol, the yin yang symbol. And it started twirling, slowly started twirling around, and then he started forcing the magical energy around it that was already inside of his body to mix in with this and to pump it through this, what he thought was developing his stanchion, into the rest of his body. During this time, the cultivator, Bill, ran out there really quick and was like, holy shit. Um, and started using a healing technique on the kid. Um, and he was like freaking out because his body started, it looked like his or his skin just started melting away from him and gradually started pumping out this black stuff, which he understood what that was the impurities of his body, but it was way too soon for that. And then all of a sudden he started seeing how even the flesh and his organs started melting away. He started using the healing spell at the bulk of his ability, because the one thing he was actually good at in his clan was healing stuff. He was more of a healer than a fighter, which is part of what caused a lot of the drama. But he also knew how to heal himself with it, regenerate himself in a fight to allow him to outlast most opponents. Well, he started pumping this energy into him, trying to save this kid, and it started working. Um, Lee looked back, or felt his master trying to, what he thought was trying to help him cultivate, and then he started using the energy to start replacing some of the hurt. And well, as that was going on, he was actually starting to heal up. All his muscles were completely redone. His basically his entire organs and stuff was saturated with both magic and cultivation, which neither one of them knew this at the time. And then the yin yang part started twirling around in his body. He let it did what was natural, but then he started actually breaking down the inner parts of it to make it feel to what his master taught him what a dancing should look like. Well, his internal magical wells started actually springing up too, um, with elemental light throwing all through him of all different colors, plus his really pure substance. And then he started developing his actual dancing around the yin yang, what he thought was his dancing to begin with. Um, which he is also saw his soul within the dancing as well, and then he started mixing everything together without, and then started pushing the energies throughout his entire body. So he was, next thing he knows, a storm ends up popping up overhead. Um, thundering and lightning. The cultivator, Bill, started freaking out, but he was no way near gonna let this 5, 6 year old kid die. I mean, he just wasn't going to do it. Well, next thing he knows, um, heavenly heavenly lightning strikes the kid on the top of the head. He started freaking out and tried to do everything he can to actually save this kid. Well, what ended up happening is the kid actually used his magic and touched the lightning, pulling it down into his stanchion and out through his limbs and out through the body inside his stanchion started filling up, breaking down, rebuilding itself, breaking down, while everything else was starting to be staples and started actually becoming a finite core, a stanchion core. And then within that core, there was still the wolf and the yin yang symbol that kind of merged together itself. And the wolf became, it was like a finite wolf inside his dancing core that was actually pushing in energy itself. Like it was its own separate entity, which he didn't know at the time it really was. So he was actually cultivating for both the wolf and himself with pushing all these magical elements all through him and the wolf's body. And without the magic and the other cultivator healing him at this time, he'd have probably died during this. But the cultivation measures actually seeped it, he started actually pushing in some of the energy that his master was pushing back into him and contacted his Danchin and started actually doing the same thing he was doing to himself with the excess energy through his Danchin, going actually transferring over from his Danchin over to the cultivator's arms down through his Danchin. The Bill was just doing everything he possibly could to save this boy's life. He started getting too attached to him, and he was like, hey, this is my first actual disciple outside of being in this torment, being pushed out of my sect. This guy was doing everything he could to save this kid, so he didn't notice that he started getting stronger himself. Well, next thing you know, there's lightning being pressed off around coming off of the bodies hitting the ground and then circulating back through the ground into the feet of both cultivators, back up through, with the lightning just being pressed down, being like it was like trying to release its grip. The heavens were trying to release the heavily tribulation upon him, was trying to get rid of it. He was like, what the hell is going on here? Well, the next thing you know, a big explosion happens. This explosion finally hit the ground, and both cultivators like shot away from each other. And the kid got shot off this cliff and ended up about 100 yards away and then smacking the ground with a force directly onto his head. No actual damage happened, mainly because he actually became a true immortal throughout this whole process. Him and his werewolf became true immortals. His skin was tougher, but because of everything happening all at once, he lost all the memories of who he was and what he just remembered. His name was Lee. And then he remembered being, someone called him a blight, so he started, he just made up his last name as True Blight. Well, he was found by this couple and brought him to the police. He was basically knocked out, where the police ended up taking him to the hospital, chastising the couple and like, why the hell didn't you just I mean, you can tell this kid is hurt. There was no actual, with him being unconscious for as long as he was, but there was no actual visible wounds or anything. Well, they ran tests on him, and they found that he was kind of peculiar, but like none of the tests worked properly. The radio, um, when they tried to use the X-rays and stuff, couldn't actually penetrate his skin, and they were like curious, but hey, this is a small town where crazy things happen all the time. He finally woke up and he was like, he started freaking out because he had no idea who he was, where he was, but then all he can remember is his name and his, that somebody called him a blight, so he ended, when this doctor looking thing, or this guy, big guy, came in with a trench coat and started asking him who he was and stuff, and he's like, my name is Lee Truebright. Um, he was like, that's a weird name. He was like, that's the only thing I can remember other than all these crazy thoughts of um, this purple energy, and started naming off a whole bunch of like werewolves, vampires. He's like, and I'm freaking out because he started talking about it like it was finite. Well, they ended up sending the 6-year-old boy to a mental hospital, thinking that he actually got brain damage or something has actually happened to him. Keep in mind, this is a really old town that didn't have a lot of actual doctors and was more superstitious than they were actual scientist type thing. So he was in this sect for, or not sect, but in this hospital for about um, till he was about 11 years old before they finally released him back into an orphanage. They knew that he kept saying that there were still weird things that he was seeing, but they was like, hey, just don't tell anybody. People will think that you're crazy, and then they'll bring you back in here. And to got this kid to the point where every time he started seeing stuff that was out of normal, like this black mist that he saw on people, this blackish red mist, or when he saw a few people that had an aura of this like wolf just traveling beside him, or like inside the people, he started freaking out but never said anything. And just anytime he was in public, he was more, this is just my imagination, that started acting more like he was crazy. Well, keep in mind, when he was in the mental institution, he was still allowed to actually, one of the doctors actually brought in a teacher and started teaching him. And he ended up at high school level at the before he was 12 years old. When he was released into the orphanage, they just threw him in the public school system, where he was outshining everybody, but he was forcing himself to dumb his questions down and stuff because he just didn't want to deal with people, because thought he was literally crazy. To the point where even when girls and stuff would actually come to him, and all he would say is, hey, you don't want nothing to do with me, I'm kind of loony toony. They laughed for a second and then realized he wasn't joking and quickly just scurried away, and people started calling him Looney Tune in the school. Well, this big test came around. It was like to see where everybody was at, and they came and something like an SAT, but it was just trying to gauge to where all the students and everything was at throughout this state, the state of Georgia they were in. It was just something they were trying to get backwater schools to be a little bit more um, to find out where they actually needed to be and actually try to help them to get better and more educated kids so they could have better start growing some of these backwater communities. Well, when he took this test, they ask everything from middle school on up to um, college level questions. I mean, and he was dumb enough to when they asked him what they wanted to do, he's like, "Hey, just give me the entire test." And as a just to see if what the kid could do, the prompter actually gave him the um, full enchilada. So he was there for 12 hours a day for the next 3 days doing all these tests, learning, and he was actually having a ball because he didn't have to deal with people. He loved talking to people. But he felt like he was a threat, and he felt like he was just Looney Tunes. So he never really developed any skills to actually protect any of these people. Or and he just kept saying he was just crazy, so he's in his mind he was just protecting himself from these people. Well, when they were grading his test, he had a perfect score on there. Keep in mind, this was went from like eighth grade to um, beyond college level test, and he took the choice of taking the full thing instead of just taking, which caught some variety. But then he was like, "Hey, don't really ship me off anywhere. I'm still kind of crazy." I mean, I hate to say it, but and I seem fine, but that's just because I keep the shit to myself. I mean, I talk to myself that looks like a little wolf all the time, and that's no. Everybody chuckles, but then they started looking into them, and that's generally what they saw. But then once they graded all the tests and everything, he came back with a perfect score. The state of Georgia did something a little bit peculiar. Um, they actually came up to him about 2 weeks later in class, brought him out of class, and actually started talking to him in the principal's office. And they started asking some generic questions, seeing if he was cheating or they could catch him in a lie. But he was like, no. And they asked him a few questions, like academically, that no way a 6-year old or a 12-year old at this point would know what he's talking about. Um, well, they started talking to him back and forth, and then realized he wasn't. He actually did what he did. It wasn't a joke. He actually and fiberglass, and it was like he looked at the kid and was like, you know what? Let me tell you what. Since you don't want any of the public variety of this, and with everything that's going on, we're just going to basically say that you graduated high school at this point. And we'll even, if you ever do end up going to college, we'll make sure you get the credit for all the different courses that you passed basically by just taking this test. And they made sure all of this information was in his public record. So if he ever went to a any school, any national based college, he would have credits for the test he took. And they ended up chastising the prompter for even giving him the entire test next to everything else too. Well, he ended up going back to the orphanage saying, explaining to him that, hey, I graduated high school. Of course, they didn't believe him until he ended up having the principal call and be like, hey, yeah, there was a mistake take, and he ended up taking the college level um, scholastic test, and with the grade he got on it, we're going to pretty much say he graduated high school because he's smarter than his top percentile of his of everybody that ever took the test. But because of all the weirdness around this and how why would they let a middle schooler, a seventh grader, which he was going on his eighth, it was at the end of the school year. So we're letting him basically, he's graduated high school. And I understand with him being in an orphanage, um, he cannot actually legally start working until he's 15, 16 years old. So we're going to let him stay here, or then provided enough funds and everything to let him stay here up until he's about 16 years of age. And then he'll have the choice of, he'll end up having to leave then. But by then, he'll actually be able to start working a normal job or taking a scholarship ride if he so choose that path. And they knew that there's a lot of people that would love to have him in a school, but with all the extra stuff that they needed to keep quiet, they didn't just announce his name throughout the world or the internet, and they found that it would probably be more detrimental um, to his mental health. It's kicking a kid out at 16 years old of just because he can actually go to college at that age now didn't seem right in its own right, but that's what they ended up deciding. Keep in mind, this entire time, he always still kept up with his cultivation. He kept up with the exercise, and he was learning stuff by the bucket loads. And all this craziness outside of his body, outside of him doing the cultivation, he used that to actually relax his mind and stuff. That even though he knows this is not real, that it actually gives him peace of mind. Well, all this time he had several breakthroughs in his cultivation, and he's almost at a demi-human, or not demi-human, but demigod level of cultivation at this point, and he's just about to turn 16 years old, and he decides to he's gonna take a walk across the country from park to park to place, and he actually started planning all this out. Um, he ended up started working when he was 15 years old, got enough money to be able to get him a car and insurance, and but it was basically just this leftover bike that he rebuilt from the ground up at his job that ended up giving him a vehicle. And he paid, like, the state actually paid all of his insurance up until he was like 15 years old. Which, come to find out, though, later on, that it was actually somebody else that paid for all of that, but nobody knew exactly who it was. And it was just somebody that knew the situation of everything. So he was going to go on a natural hike using this bike that he actually made road ready to cross country across the United States. And then once he gets to the other side of the country, he figures that he'd be about 17 something years old, and he would be able to figure out what he would do, like if he was going to truly go to college, or if he was just going to get a job, or what. This allowed him, and then he would DoorDash and stuff like that for his phone and for any extra money as he was going across the nation. Because face it, he didn't, other than his insurance bill, which has already been paid for, the bike he had was already fully paid for. So he just got all the necessary equipment to be built onto his bike so he could carry food and keep it hot, bringing it from. He had like a little section for it, just a straight cooler in case there was cold beverages, and then like a little space for anything that needed to keep temperature wise, is like a little heat to it. Well, going through all this, he decided to go on his journey. He started going up north at first, started going from park to park, walking all the airways and this and this, everything before there. Then he started turning, um, once he got up to the New York area, Maine, went up through Maine and then came back down, started going across the United States. When he came to this peculiar town where he just was going to stop, get something to eat, and then head on, when he could sense all these people that looked like they had a whole bunch of wolves in them. But he just dismissed it because he thought he was crazy. But as soon as he came into the town, parked his bike, there was like um, 5 people that came up to him and was ready to fight. Keep in mind, this kid despises fighting. Despises fighting to the core. Um, I mean, this guy despises fighting so bad that it's not even fun. He puts his hands up and say, "Hey, I'm just traveling through here. I don't really have any money, And what I do have, I can't really give away because it's my property. It's stuff that I need to actually live. And he just pulled out a cell phone and a little bit of cash to get him something to eat while he puts his way through the. Because he does, like I said, he does know how to hunt. He does. So when he does run out of food and stuff, um, he knows how to get food so he can leave the money that he gets to put more towards gas because he does need it the most. Well, the next thing he knows, he sees this person growling at him, and there's this big ass wolf started marching up to him. He's like, "Whoa!" He started pushing both hands up. I have no qualm with anybody. When he looks at this wolf, it's like he knew that psychologically he knew that this wolf understood what he's saying, but then he ditched it off thinking he was just crazy. Well, with everything going on, he was having a little bit of a breakdown at this point because he could have swore up and down he saw this man turn into a wolf, and he was like the next, and all these people are yelling at him, um, rogue, or you don't belong here. And he's like, he really thought he was going to get killed. When the first person threw, when the I person threw a punch, he could have swore this person had claws on his hands. He started immediately. He just and started screaming, "This is not real! This is not real!" Which made all the wolves just stop for a second. This man walks up to him and is like, "Rogue, you do not belong here. Leave now before we get impatient." And he just looked up and is like, "This ain't real. This ain't real." And he just gets up on his bike. "You are not wolves. You're just people. My mind is playing tricks on me." And he's like, "I don't want to hurt anybody." And he just ends up getting on his bike and just drives off. His display of craziness just shook them to the core. He couldn't understand. It's like, why in the world does this kid keep saying he's crazy, seeing what he is? I mean, it got him to stop, and he's like, that had to be an act. Well, he ended up leaving this. This place was up in Illinois, so he started driving away. Well, he hunts when he has to, here and there. He gets to another bigger city. He door dashes and lifts for some money, and then he goes back up and ends up camping at different places, always keeping himself clean. Keep in mind, this guy knows how to find hidden areas and stuff that pretty well. He just chalks it up to him and his extreme survival guide instincts that he believes he's built up throughout the years. Well, he ends up turning 16 on his um, going on to 17, and he was like halfway across he is about mid of our country. um, I can't really think of a place, so just for a lack of knowledge, like Ohio ish area. And he ends up parking his bike and goes hunting while he was back up in the woods. He had plenty of gas. He made sure of it, and everything. So he started pushing everything along. Well, in the middle of the woods, he hears this sound of while he's hunting. He ended up grabbing like a few squirrels and one deer that he ended up fully cutting up, and next thing he knows, there's these pack of wolves just charge at him. No questions, no nothing, not even a hesitation. And he's sensing these wolves the same like energy as he did when he had was having a mental breakdown, which kind of did nothing for his mental health. This big wolf, um, he stood as big as a pickup truck goes and bites him, and he whirls up like, "Oh my God, I'm about to die!" And then, as soon as the teeth hit his skin, they go through the clothing, and then when they go to where he thinks he's gonna pierce his skin, half of his teeth gets pushed back up through um his jaw down through this way, breaks his jaw and shatters all of his top teeth. So it basically looks like when he bit, his bottom teeth yanked down through the bottom of his jaw, poking down through his skin of the wolf. Because keep in mind, he's this pack leader is in wolf form, and shattered all of his teeth on top. Um, and he was like, "Holy shit! How the hell did?" I mean, he thought he was losing it again. Well, he steps back and is like, "This can't be real." And then he sees this wolf turn back into a human, and then he sees like this pack of people come in, but this guy that turned back into human was bleeding profusely out of his mouth, and he was looking at this guy in pure fear, thinking that all this was just an illusion cast upon himself. He started rocking back and forth, and this guy looked at this kid and was like, "Listen here, fill this cup up with blood, and we will not bother you anymore." And he looked at this dude like in disgust, but then he was like, "Whatever, I just want to get out of here. I'm just going crazy." And he starts grabbing his head, and he's like, and these guys put because wasn't thinking right. He ended up cutting his hand open and actually filling up this little small bowl up with his blood, and then he bandaged his hand up and took off. Keep in mind, he didn't realize, but he cut his own hand with his own claw that he pushed out for the very first time. They cut his hand open. Well, and guy and our Lee ends up getting up, getting on his bike, packing up all of his stuff, and just takes off out in the wild blue yonder. Next thing you know, This guy pours some of his blood down through this um, the hurt guy's mouth, and he started pouring some of it down, and then ends up drinking some of it himself, and then shares it with as much of the other wolves in the area as much as they possibly can. Well, as this guy, as our heroine or whatever you want to call him, the what the story is about, Lee, um, feels a shift in his energy, like his energies became a lot more finite, and he can semi hear all these people in his head, but then he shut it down as quick as it came because I mean he already thinks he's crazy, a whole bunch of voices in his head, and then once he heard an answer, allow me to take over while you go to do whatever you need to do. Um, and he's like, yes, whatever, and then he ends up shutting down that part of his brain, shutting it all out, thinking he's losing his damn mind even more. Where he decides as soon as he gets to a sizable actual town, he's gonna check himself back into a mental institution to find out what the fuck is actually going on with him. Well, at this point, he's close to 18 years old. Like he's a spitting distance, and he is heading through like Arizona up to going through that way and crossing through some of the wooded areas where he just before he gets there he does like he did before and was just going hunting for some prey while um, he putting all of his money that he had into gas, so he wouldn't tear up his car, and plus he enjoyed the outdoors. And he thought that it'd be a lot easier to try to get into college if he's after 18 years old anyway. So he does that. Well, again, another a bunch of people came rushing up and started yelling, "This is not your pact. We have a truce, but if you want to break it, we can go to war." There's a bunch of people that came out. It was like, "Whoa, whoa!" And he just puts his hands up again. Hey, I am just a traveler. I didn't know these lands were anybody in particular. I was hungry and I hunted for some food while I get to the next major city going up through here. Somebody because he needs to get some help. And he even asked one of the guys for directions. Guy laughs in his face and was like, and that's where he just lost it. He stomped down onto the ground, not realizing how he cracked a mile area of woodlands. Trees fell, ground shook, cracks came out of the ground for like small places all the way like a mile. It's like it had a small crater where he put his foot down, and this aura came out that covered like a huge part of the United States. I mean, it covered like 6 or 7 or states at that point, and he just screams out, "I am just a fucking traveler. If you motherfuckers come back up and try to hurt me anymore, there will be rivers of blood. I do not want this. This is not a challenge. Please just leave me the fuck be. I am just a fucking traveler trying to hoping that pushing, doing what he was doing would get some of the would just stop all of this insanity. And then the very last words that came out of his mouth, I am tired of this crazy bullshit, which the wolves and everybody that actually heard him thought he was talking about people messing with him, which he was just saying, I'm tired of, let me actually be normal for once in my fucking life and not see all this evil shit. I mean, at this point, he was debating about not just going to a church and seeing if the church couldn't purify him or something. He At this point, he thinks he may be demon possessed. He don't understand why he thought that, but